Shalom, everyone. This week's Parsha is much to darash on and offers much food for thought. Its focuses include the genealogies of the various descendants of the 12 tribes, leading into the story of the daughters of Zelophehad. There is also the account of Moses' arranging for a transition of leadership after he has been made aware that his time is about up and that someone else will lead the children into the promised land. We also see the outlay of the sacrificial offerings for each occasion, making this parsha a good thing to practice with if you want to get ready to lane for many of the festival readings. So having been offered this opportunity to give this darash here in the main sanctuary, what am I choosing to speak about today? Well aware of the fraughtness of what I'm about to discuss, I will be focusing on the opening verses I just read earlier about Pinchas, the title character, as it were, whose drastic and troubling actions are told in a kind of cliffhanger mode from the previous week's Parsha. As we read last week, Balak, the king of Midian, proves unsuccessful in getting the prophet Balaam to curse the children of Israel and bid to conquer them militarily. So he tries very unconventional warfare in the form of sexual and spiritual seduction. And worse, when it appears that this gambit is succeeding, nobody is heeding God's call to action against the perpetrators, especially when the Israelite prince Zimri and the Midianite princess Cosby are going out to engage in the act pretty close to flagrante delicto, only just bothering to enter into a tent. And rather than anyone trying to stop them or pull them apart, the people are just standing there and weeping, bringing on a plague that kills thousands, on top of the other tsurs the children of Israel have been dealing with at this point. But Pinchas, the grandson of Aaron, the Kohen Gadol, acts with a violence that is now disturbingly reminiscent of current events, but does the job of checking the plague. So from last week's almost cliffhanger, this parsha begins with God praising Pinchas for his zealous act and rewarding him with both the covenant of peace, the Brit Shalom, and the priesthood eternally assigned to his line. So what gives here? A covenant of peace and reward for a drastic act of violence and zealotry? Unpacking this is challenging at best, but it can begin by recognizing the covenant of peace as being in some ways a mixed blessing and separate from the permanent priesthood, though it is tied to it. According to the Or HaChaim, in his wisdom, God decided to accord Pinchas the priesthood as a gift in order to demonstrate that he did not become a priest merely through a hereditary claim, but a claim based on moral excellence. But what, we might ask now, was the moral excellence involved in Pinchas's violent act done out of zeal? According to the 19th century commentator Samson Raphael Hirsch, however awful Pinchas's act was, it was necessary to stop the evil that was going on, because the passivity as displayed by the people in the face of this act of evil was the actual threat to true peace. Wrote Hirsch, "Peace, the most complete harmony of all the conditions on earth among one another and with God, is declared to be a brit, that is, a covenant, implying some obligation for taking necessary substantive actions to make peace, furthermore, the formal agreement to do so. But as Hirsch pointedly acknowledges, in some ways, we hope very limited cases, warlike action is necessary precisely because more moderate preventive measures were not enacted." Hirsch adds, "Peace is a precious thing for which one may sacrifice all one's own rights and possessions, but never the rights of others, and that one who, for the sake of what he considers to be the preservation of peace with his fellow men, cedes the field without protest to individuals who are truly in conflict with God, actually make common cause with the enemies of the Brit Shalom." In addition, in this instance, the Ramban suggests that the Midianites' use of their women, in particular Princess Cosby, and sexual seduction as weapons of war indicated how little they cared about their own people's, in this case, moral well-being. Their hatred of the people Israel was that great, a kind of enemy, alas, that has not disappeared. But, in the Eitz Chaim commentary and elsewhere, there's the acknowledgement that the broken vav in the Shalom and Brit Shalom, as written in the Torah scroll, and the smaller yud in Pinchas's name in verse 11, both indicate the diminishment that comes with taking even this necessary action. In the writing of the very Sefer, there's a recognition that war is hell, and that even when the cause is just, it can diminish those who fight it. Moses of Coucy pointed out that there is a reason for the cliffhanger motive straddling the Baal Peor narrative between two partiot, to encourage the withholding of judgment of Pinchas' actions, and pointedly not to rush to reward zealous act of violence. All of these are ways of saying to Pinchas, with the awarding of the breach shalom, you are to be commended for doing what you needed to do in this emergency, but don't make a habit. And I will further qualify, in light of other recent events, that this should apply to actual war situations only. Otherwise, unhinged zealotry that leads to violence, even against perceived evil when there is no immediate danger, is quite another thing. So if Pinchas' actions that stop this plague and foil the Midianites' method of warfare that violate norms of decency still leave us uneasy, we need to turn back a page, as it were, to those whose response appeared to, as Hirsch might suggest, be about peace at any price, which can then become too high a price. In many ways, it is emblematic, historically, of the trouble with pacifism, at least in its most absolute form, which makes no distinction between those who have attacked and those who are merely fighting back. Absolute pacifism, as our rabbis point out, can allow evil to flourish. It also violates the Jewish principle of self-defense and the realities of people who have had war made on them for so long. It can also trivialize the causes of war if it fails to understand the very real role of hate, let alone fails to understand that making peace is a lot more than about simply telling people to stop fighting. So the difference between a pacifist and a peacemaker may come down to the willingness to, as they say, do the work, as well as the understanding of just how easy making peace is not. If it were, as Jonathan has liked to say, would there be a Nobel Prize for it? Plus, true peacemaking requires the understanding that it is a long-term process that involves a hard look at the role of hate and prejudice, including anti-Semitism, and willingness to work to eliminate them. Earlier this year, I sent Sophie to the ADL Never Is Now summit with the college student registration rate, and settled for virtual attendance myself with its more limited offerings. Sitting in front of my computer screen for longer than I would have liked, I would encounter multiple moving and inspiring speakers, not Jared Kushner, who thankfully was just one of many, and one whose words stayed with me the most was just such a peacemaker, the renowned content creator and social media influencer Nusair Yassin, better known by his social media handle, Nas Daily, who is this year's recipient of the Daniel Pearl Award for those who've devoted their lives and careers to building bridges between Jews and Muslims in the service of ending hate. Nas, I should add, was formally introduced by last year's laureate, who I will still call Beth El's own Imam Abdullah Antepli, another peacemaker, by the way. In his acceptance speech, Nas spoke of his own dueling identities as a Palestinian national and an Israeli citizen, and his life's work building bridges, and efforts fairly complicated but not stopped by this current war. There were two things he said that stood out regarding his seriousness about pursuing peace. The first, and this was key, was his emphasis on fighting hate, and specifically mentioning anti-Semitism. Why was there at the ADL, one might say, but also demonstrating an understanding of the role of hate, in particular Jew hatred, in too many wars in recent times, and also the necessity of its elimination as a component of a true and lasting peace. The other was his acknowledgement of the loneliness of the peacemakers in the short term, but he asserted that with patience they would prevail in the long term, as long as they kept up the work in the service of coexistence. He illustrated the latter with a discovery he made on a trip to Japan to understand the effect of war on this country that had been bombed with nuclear bombs, and he concluded that peace does not flow from hate. And his talk inspired me to adapt a saying from another religion that could sum up his philosophy: blessed are the peacemakers, for theirs is the future. May we all someday soon be blessed with a lasting covenant of peace, a true breach shalom, with the understanding of how hard won it will have been. Shabbat shalom.